Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Cyber Peace Talks with Mr. Anuj Bansali, hosted by Cyber Peace Foundation in collaboration with PhonePe. I would like to wholeheartedly welcome Mr. Bansali, who took out time from his busy schedule, especially during such difficult times of pandemic. Thank you so much, sir, for joining us for the Cyber Peace Talk.
Thank you, Shimoni, for inviting me. It's been a pleasure. I think we've been working towards the same kind of goals, and
Yes.
your idea of educating or connecting more and more people to the same is actually commendable. And I came to know about the cyber piece pretty late, but I think it would be pretty much helpful if we join hands in solving for these kind of fraud scenarios.
Indeed, sir. Indeed. Thank you so much. Allow me to introduce you to the audience, sir.
Yeah.
All right. Ladies and gentlemen, I introduce Mr. Anuj Bansali. Currently, he's the Director of Project Management PhonePe and has over a decade of experience working with companies like Amazon, Flipkart, and PhonePe. He's been working on fraud prevention side for the past 6-7 years and has been involved with various entities such as CyberSafe, RBI, NPCI in working together to reduce frauds. He has also been solving for preventing fraudsters from causing financial loss to the companies in the e-commerce space, which I think becomes the most important thing nowadays when everybody is transacting online, right, sir?
Yeah.
All right. And now he is into building systems to prevent customers from getting duped with rise of fintech platforms. Sir, this is amazing. Thank you so much for joining us, and hope we will get a lot of insight into saving ourselves from such fraud things happening online during the payments.
Sure.
So over to you, sir. You can take on from here.
Okay, great. Hi guys, good morning. I hope we are comfortable in English. I'll be switching between Hindi and English. Those are the only two languages I know of. So it's great talking to all of you in understanding my journey with the fraud universe or the anti-fraud patterns has been spanning over close to 7 to 8 years now. And I've been working with various law enforcement agencies as well as with various companies as well as your network providers to understand how do we prevent fraud, how do we basically stop people from getting defrauded and even companies from getting defrauded. It's not just people losing money, it's also about companies losing money and sometimes into the tune of crores that end up with these social engineering frauds. One question that I keep getting asked again and again, right, is with this digitization, with all of these, the frauds are increasing, probably we should not have digitized. Would like to clarify some of those things around. It is not like the frauds have not happened earlier. It is akin to saying that the thefts have stopped happening, even with all the policing in place. With digitization, with a lot of these new avenues, frauds will continue to happen. And my primary reason for saying that is it is a very lucrative industry. From the different discussions I have from banks to different partners to our internal teams, you are looking at anywhere to the tune of close to 30 to 40 crores a month of bare minimum on the fintech side of platform frauds. And I'm not talking about large frauds. These are where individual customers are being targeted. This is where systems are being targeted to all the fintech companies, to new companies which are giving cashbacks. So if you're looking at somewhere right up to 50 crores a month, over a period of time, that an annual run rate of 600 crores a year, that is too huge an industry which will stop on its own. It is akin to saying the piracy of CDs or DVDs will stop. None of that has ever stopped. So similarly, frauds will continue. My focus of today's discussion was about threefold. One is most of my coverage is towards on the three axes. One is what kind of payment systems exist, why do frauds happen, why do more often than not we are not able to, let's say, save these funds, or why do a law enforcement agency or a customer has to run around figuring out where my money is and how do I get my money back. Second is more about the second axis is more about what kind of fraud patterns have we seen as an increase in during the COVID-19 over the past couple of months? And third is, what can we do about it jointly? There are some initiatives which are already there trying to solve for these frauds across the industry. To cover is, right, it's a very basic plain vanilla deck, right? It is talking about frauds which are happening on the UPI, and the second one is on the cards. Cards is effectively your payment gateway frauds, which could include a credit card or a debit card. The third type of frauds, we have seen very low numbers across the industry as well, which is on the wallets. That is a wallet being taken over and the funds have been drained out. We've seen very, very few cases, or that number is not as prominent as the UPI and the card frauds. From an data where we look at around, it is a 50-50 to somewhere a 60-40 split between and a card fraud kind of a numbers. Now, within UPI and card frauds, what kind of frauds do we see? So card frauds are your most common type of frauds that have been there since last a decade or so, right? And the most common type of frauds is I calling you to say, let's say, I'm calling from an RBI or your bank and your card is about to expire, or there are cashback points which are about to expire. Give me the card number, CVV, OTP, etc. And most of the times the money gets utilized either as a wallet top-up or as a P2M. P2M here stands for a peer-to-merchant transaction. That is the industry norm when we say it is a customer doing a merchant transaction. A merchant transaction could be anything from a purchase on a website, could be a Flipkart, Amazon, or any others, right? To purchase of inside app. You have seen a lot of fraud trends today shifting towards credits being purchased on gaming websites, right? So you have a lot of these online gaming websites where people will utilize these funds. Again, most of this money goes as a wallet top-up or as a P2M for further utilization. Now, where does the money go, let's say, from a wallet top-up? In most of the cases, either they will try to withdraw that money to a bank account by closing off a wallet or transferring to another wallet. From there, they would try either to do a merchant transaction or withdraw that money out of a bank account. In the case of a merchant transaction, either they try to buy, let's say, digital goods, which is something like a gift card or an EGV, right? Those are the common terms that they buy online, or they will try to buy physical goods. Most of the fraudsters have stopped trying to do physical goods because they have realized now the companies work very well with law enforcement agency, and it has a window of anywhere between 6 to 7 days for a delivery to happen. So it ends up getting blocked and the money gets reversed. So they try to either consume that money in terms of withdrawing that to a bank account or in terms of a digital gift card. Why do they purchase digital gift cards? Again, going back to, I'll give you an example of a year and a half ago, right? Busted a small group who were trying to defraud customers. And this guy, the guy I caught was a 12th standard class guys, right? He was trying to do this as a side pocket money in which somebody else will, let's say, buy a gift card. He would effectively go and sell those gift cards at a 50% value. So the fraudster will sell it for a 25% to distributors. These distributors will sell it anonymously on Telegram channels, on multiple social media groups, etc. to people at a 60%, 50% value. For them, it is plain easy money, right? It is for 100 rupees. The fraudster has no cost. He sells it for 25 rupees. The distributor of these so-called underage kids will end up selling it for 50 to 60 rupees. And these guys, it's plain vanilla money, right? They are not doing the fraud, but effectively they are just selling and redistributing. For them, it is a pocket money which comes in. The other kind of frauds, which is on the UPI platform, right, is again distributed into three different kinds. The first one is spoofing, the second is on the P2P, and the third is on P2M. P2P stands for peer-to-peer, P2M stands for peer-to-merchant. I will cover the peer-to-peer and peer-to-merchant in detail in the next two slides. Spoofing is effectively a fraud, which is a little technical in nature. This utilizes a way to do social engineering plus hacking of a user, in which a user is made to believe and send out an SMS. Once I do that, the fraudster gains control of the UPI infrastructure. UPI infrastructure for a customer is technically very secure in terms of it being guarded with a even the registration is a device binding, then it is a UPI pin. UPI pin only can be set with a debit card as well as with ATM pin, right? Still, fraudsters, once they gain access to it, then it is very easy for them to game the system and get the money out. Most of these cases of frauds that we are talking about revolve all about social engineering. What I mean by that is, with social engineering, they are able to convince a user in either giving up the card number, OTP, CVV, or honoring a collect call or honoring an intent link, etc. Right? So I will move on to the peer-to-peer and peer-to-merchant. Peer-to-peer is effectively when, let's say, Anuj is sending this money to a person X, that is treated as a peer-to-peer transfer. It is nothing different than today or 5 years ago when you were transferring money from a IMPS bank account, right? You would log into your banking portal, you would click on NEFT or IMPS, enter an account at IFSC, and then click to send money, right? That would be guarded either with a two-factor of authentication, which is an OTP. In this case, it is a UPI pin. Now, peer-to-peer, the money never touches any of the system players, right? It is an acquirer bank and an issuer bank. Assuming, let's say, Anuj is transferring money to person X. Anuj belongs to, has a bank account with HDFC, and a person X has a bank account with, let's say, SBI. In a peer-to-peer transfer, even though there will be a lot of systems which will touch this entire transaction, the money directly gets transferred from HDFC to SBI without ever having to touch any other player's bank account. Why this is different from a peer-to-merchant is, a peer-to-merchant transaction is somebody has onboarded a merchant. Let's say today PhonePe acquires, let's say, Flipkart as a merchant. Now, if somebody is doing a transaction on Flipkart via PhonePe, the money will first land into PhonePe's bank account, and wherein then it will get transferred to Flipkart's bank account. Versus in the case of a peer-to-peer, the money never touches, let's say, PhonePe's or Google Pay or Paytm's bank account. That is the basic need of it. Now, why I'm trying to cover these topics effectively is based on my conversations across with different law enforcement agencies pan-India. One of the most common things that I have seen is the lack of understanding or the lack of clarity in terms of why are we not able to save funds, or why does it become complicated. To show why it becomes complicated, I'll just go to the next slide. So before going to the details of peer-to-peer, there are, on a technical aspect, there are only three kinds of frauds that we see, right? Other than the spoofing. One is a request money fraud, which is basically you will be asked to open up your app. There is already something like a display screen which says congratulations, or I'm transferring you money or cashback or something like that. And you are asked to pay later or decline. So most of the apps have these standard terminologies across. When you click on a pay, it will take you to a landing screen which will ask for your UPI pin. The moment you enter, the money gets transferred to the person who's requesting this funds. So unlike an IMPS flow, UPI came back with a flow called as collect. In collect, instead of I giving you, let's say, the person X my bank account and IFSC number, I can just raise a collect call to the requester, which is person X, and ask him to authorize that payment. Once he authorizes, the money will instantly hit my bank account. I don't have to give him the details, my account number. I don't have to give him any other details. I can directly. It's a very good innovative feature which is only present in India. However, yes, fraudsters have continued to misuse some of these features. The second type of fraud that we have seen again is a QR or a link request. This is again akin to send money, which is me sending that to person X voluntarily, and tomorrow I call it as that this guy frauded me because he did not give me either a goods or a services, or he convinced me to send money. The QR or the link request fraud effectively is a different layer on top of the send money kind of application, in which either a QR code gets shared, which you scan. Once you scan, it again resolves to a BPA. BPA is nothing but, let's say, a email address for your bank account IFSC, so that the money can land into your bank account. Or I can receive a link. We have seen cases where people say, I clicked on a link and the money got lost. In UPI framework, there is no such thing that I clicked on a link and the money got lost, unless you are giving access to the entire system, which is your remote working apps or an AnyDesk app, right? most of these frauds always involve you giving out a UPI pin or authorizing the request using a UPI pin. Right. The third one is send money, in which either I can send money to an account at IFSC, which is akin to same as IMPS or NEFT, or I can send money to a VPA. I think most of us would have donated anywhere from a 1 to a 10,000 rupees to, let's say, PM CARES fund. That is called as a send money. The fraud that happens in that is people social engineer to convince you to send that money out to a particular VPA or a bank account, and later do not give any goods or service or turn out to be fake. So these are the three different ways in which normally a UPI fraud occurs. Now, coming down to why is it very, very difficult to understand the money flow? See, earlier the core banking infrastructure, right? When I wanted to do an IMPS or NEFT, you were never aware of what a UPI is, what an NPCI was. It was always about logging into, let's say, an HDFC bank, adding an account IFSC and transferring to SBI. It was considered as a 2 or a 3-party system at banks, right? In which there was a HDFC bank, there was a core switch services, which is or an IMPS services, again maintained by, let's say, NPCI, and then there is a receiver bank, which is SBI. With these growing modes of digitization and the easier ways of doing transactions, the parties have also increased. So when I say the parties today, and these diagrams are publicly available, these are NPCI diagrams, not built by me, just to clarify. It has become close to a 7 to 8 party system, even in a peer-to-peer money transfer. If you start with one, right, there is an acquiring mobile channel or a mobile app, which could be, let's say, a PhonePe, a Paytm, a Google Pay, or a WhatsApp Pay, or any other app. Post that, you have something called as a payer PSP. A payer PSP is idea. PSP stands for a payment service provider, which is the one which will process the transaction, right? So every a Google Pay or a PhonePe will work on some PSP license. Those are the processing banks. It could be, let's say, an HDFC bank or an ICICI bank or a Yes Bank as a PSP. Post that, it hits the UPI infrastructure, which is owned by NPCI. Then there is a pay PSP. So assume I'm sending money from Anuj Bhansali @YBL to Anuj Bhansali @Paytm. The receiver channel is actually a pay PSP is @Paytm. A payer PSP over here is @YBL, and channel is effectively PhonePe app when I'm paying through that. And then you have a remitter bank and a beneficiary bank. Ideally, if you look at it, the money flows between 5, 6, 7, 8, right? The entire journey between 1 to 10 is more about information. The actual money flow happens from 5, 6, 7, and 8, which is, let's say, the remitter bank and the beneficiary bank. A remitter, in this case, I was paying, which is Anuj Bhansali, HDFC Bank, going to a person X, which is SBI, right? So beneficiary bank is the SBI bank. In any of these cases, the money never touches the app ecosystem layer ever, right? And hence it becomes complicated, because when you come saying that a fraud has happened using somebody gave a BPA, which is @Paytm to PhonePe, PhonePe will have no information what is the bank details behind this, right? Similarly, the information of which bank account it was paid from is with the payer PSP. Some of the money actually goes to a bank account X. That is what you need to find out and request the funds to be stopped. Now coming to the P2M or the peer to merchant, though it is much similar to the last diagram we have seen, this becomes further complicated because it becomes from close to a 7 to a 10 party system, right? Now there is a customer PSP, there is a merchant PSP, there is a merchant. Assume, let's say, there's a merchant called Flipkart, and I am a customer on Flipkart. Then there's a merchant PSP or a merchant app provider, which, let's say, Flipkart is integrated with PhonePe, right? PhonePe is integrated further with Yes Bank. Yes Bank is further integrated with NPCI. And now I have raised a request to, let's say, Anuj @Paytm. Now this is the customer information. Nobody knows, because only a merchant will be aware of who has raised this request. The merchant PSP will only see that the money request has been raised to Anuj @Paytm. Once this part is done, the customer PSP raises it to the third party app, which is, let's say, I go towards a Paytm app where Anuj @Paytm authorizes by entering the PIN. Once that PIN is entered and authorized, NPCI gives a go ahead saying that this is a valid transaction, the money can be debited. So money gets debited from the issuer bank, moves towards an acquirer bank. In case of an acquirer bank, the acquirer bank will be, let's say, the merchant acquirer, which is, since PhonePe is the merchant acquirer for Flipkart, the money sits in PhonePe's bank account. Post that, PhonePe will settle it to Flipkart. The reason it becomes tough is if, let's say, the fraudster, let's say the Anuj goes to a cyber cell police station and says, I got defrauded for 10,000 rupees, right? And there's a request that you see that Paytm said the money has been authorized. First step is you will reach out to Paytm, but Paytm will have no idea because the merchant itself, they can at max tell you that this is the merchant VPA or the virtual profile, virtual payment address where the money has been received. When you say, you will see it as, let's say, Flipkart@YBL. For Flipkart@YBL, you would either need to contact Flipkart or the issuer of that handle, which is PhonePe in this case. Once you do that, that is when you will get to know, okay, this is the money which has been credited and the order has been successful. In case of some of these frauds, let's say a PhonePe will reach out to Flipkart to say that can we cancel these transactions and can we refund the money back. In other cases, the police will have to reach out to the merchant, which is Flipkart in this case, and talk to get this order cancelled. The reason I say these become complicated is, as you're seeing, right, though a transaction has just happened from party into two party, there are close to 8 to 9 interactions in the system. And each party will have its own limited set of information. They will never have the full justification of where the money flows, right? Coming to the type of frauds that we have seen in terms of COVID, spoofing frauds is something that I was talking about, right? A user is asked to send SMS to a number. In this case, most of the time, a fraudster will call up, let's say Anuj, and say, I am calling from XYZ and you are getting some cash back, or the calls are either in the talk of a KYC or let's say in talk of you have received a cashback or you are facing an issue with something or the other. They will ask you to, okay, I'm forwarding you an SMS. You need to forward it to a number. Basis on this, we will verify your entity and then solve your issue. So once the user does it, the entire context of UPI is based on a device being binded to a particular phone number, right? And to a VPA. Once you forward this particular SMS, you are actually authorizing a particular device to get access to your account. User will receive a message that says the UPI binding has started. User will be asked to share his last 4 ATM last digits as well as the OTP. Or if a UPI pin is set, they will ask just for a UPI pin. Once this thing happens, this is where the max amount of fraud can technically happen. I can wipe out your bank account, and this fraud is the most difficult. I covered it, though it is the least possible. NPCI has already worked on a solutioning for a lot of these. We have implemented a lot of steps and we have not seen a bulge in these cases even during COVID. These are very few single digit kind of cases that we've seen over months. That is the spoofing fraud. Coming to the second one, which is a KYC or a screen recording fraud. This is the normal kind of a fraud where if you can see right on the right side, the fraudsters can use this app to steal money. A person loses 4.2 lakh to a KYC fraud. This is the case where now the fraudsters have also gotten very, very active, and they realize that sending a collect, since NPCI and the bank partners and the third-party providers already knew these kind of frauds are happening, they started putting in guardrails so that the amount is restricted. We don't see a too big of a fraud amount happening over there. You will see a lot of customers. I was asked to follow the same process where somebody sent out a number saying that your KYC for PhonePe or your KYC for Paytm is about to expire. Click on this link. Once you click on this link, either it will take you to a web form where they are asked you to fill your details. Then they will give you a call, right? Once they call you up, they can also call you in terms of most of the time customers do is they will post that, hey, I am having a transaction problem, and post it on a social media, or they will post it on a consumer grievance forum. Fraudsters get these numbers very easily from there. They will say, yes, sir, I'm calling from the official support helpline, and we know you have a problem of 9,400 rupees in your this transaction with, let's say, a PhonePe, and we want to solve that. Most of the people fall for it and they try to follow the steps. The first thing most of these fraudsters do is they will ask you to go to a Play Store, search for QS. QS is nothing but quick support. It is an app which asks for permission, and these are all very well genuine apps, right? These are apps which will allow me to take control of your screens of your mobile device, and I can remotely control this. What they do is, once they have taken the remote access, again, it's a part of social engineering. You will have to share an OTP, you will have to share a passcode for the fraudster to gain access to your device. Once they have taken a remote access, they will ask you either to do a 1 rupee transaction to say, oh, it is working or not. In that, they normally capture the UPI pin. Once they have done that, what they will do is they will keep you busy on the phone, and in the background, they will try to operate your device and transfer the entire funds out. It becomes very difficult because for anybody, any company or any infrastructure or any network player also, that the device is the same. It is the customer device. Customer is initiating a transaction and he's transferring that funds out. It is no anomaly pattern, right? It is you are looking at that money going out, which is a genuine case. I can transfer 10,000 even today to Flipkart, and I have transferred 10,000 right now. So it is effectively one of the most devastating frauds because the fraudster will keep you on the phone. They will initiate multiple transactions and get the money out. So that is what we call as the screen recording frauds or the KYC frauds. The other kind of frauds that we saw, especially around the April 1st week, it was the EMI fraud. RBI announced effectively that the EMIs have to be or can be postponed. Fraudsters started calling up customers saying that we know your home loan is there, and they will never be very specific. They will say, sir, we know your home loan. Assuming most of people have home, 5 out of 10 cases you will hit somebody saying that yes, home loan is there and I want to defer my EMI. And they would say that, okay sir, here is the process and there is a 4,999 processing fee that we will ask for. Once that is done, we will be deferring your EMI as well as interest. So a lot of time greed also kicks in. Now, either it will work in terms of a collect request fraud, in which I will send you a request of 4,999, honor it, and the money goes out. Or I will ask that, okay, sir, I have to verify your bank account, share your card number and OTP. Again, I will use your card number, OTP to do a wallet transaction of 10,000, and I will basically then turn my phone. Right? This is the most kind of fraud that we had seen during the April month that spiked up. The third, and again, this problem was there since the past 2 years, during COVID, this actually came up, which is a maps or a search fraud. It is effectively fraudsters taking control over a maps listing or a search engine result, right? What they used to do is they used to go click on a place. Let's say it is the chai wala shop which you frequently near, right? They will click on that. They will enter their own number instead of the actual shop number. Now, when people search for them, the first number that is an optimized result will show up as that number when they call up. And this has happened with the home delivery, especially either as a food delivery or an alcohol delivery, where people started searching for these phone numbers, or even in case of a support number, they searched for, let's say, support numbers. They got either a fake website or a fake search number through a maps listing, or let's say the search page itself. They will say, yes, we will do it. Why don't you send us this and we will deliver you the goods? The customer happily pays anywhere from whatever the order amount is. An hour later, when he doesn't receive the money, that is where they look into and they figure out that the actual number itself is the fraud number, and unfortunately, the money is gone. Most of these cases, it has no link to the actual shop, actual search listing or the maps listing to the owner of those. And that is where they lose money. The third most or the fourth most common we have seen across is fake website or a fake VPA, right? As you can see in the screen, right? PM Cares, the moment it started, right? Within the next couple of hours, we started seeing, and though we had a very, very good cohort with NPCI, with all the banks, we got very proactive about and started blocking almost all of them within a couple of hours of this going live. If you look at it, the most common way to safeguard any customer or yourself from there is if you click on a verify UPI ID, right? You will see that the registered name of the user will come in. So even there was a PM Cares at the SBI, which was an original actual one. You saw it as a PM Cares versus the fraudster had created PM Care at the @SBI. The registered name came as something Malgoha Akhil, right? People have also ended up creating a lot of fake websites. There is a XYZ domain, .xyz, which is now most common, right? And I think it is available for 99 rupees for a year. People are able to set up a one-page website, and they will set up an exactly genuine, authentic looking website of most common platforms, be it a Flipkart or an Amazon or any other website, right, that you can think of. They will discount goods over there and say a 50,000 rupees iPhone is available for 5,000. It is, everything is as per the actual website. Just looking at a website, you might not differ unless you are very careful about the URLs. The URLs would be anywhere between Flipkart deals .xyz, live xyz deals, something like that. The moment you click on the pay screen, it will take you to a QR page or a UPI intent link. It will ask you to enter your number, or it will say scan this QR and make a payment. People will end up paying for that and realize that this website itself is fake. Most of these times, within a day to a week, these website pages themselves go down. The people will complain. More often than not, these are peer-to-peer transactions. When they're pasting a QR code or when they're pasting a VPA handle, these are not merchant transactions. In case of a merchant transactions, most of the companies or almost every company which is providing these services will do a background check. They will onboard that merchant. They will hold the settlement for some time. So you have provisions of chargeback. You have provisions to contest in case of goods and services are not delivered. But in these cases, since the money is a peer-to-peer, as I was talking in the third or fourth slide, the money goes from your account directly to the fraudster account, and you have nothing to save these funds from. So how do we stay safe, or what can we do? Is fraud all about saying that nothing can be done? The answer to that is no. One thing I would like to specially clear this out, right, is that it is not about a bank versus a PPI versus a private player or versus a law enforcement agency. It is all of us versus the fraudsters. See, the fraudsters have realized that it is, since the payment infrastructure is complex, since the understanding of these systems is complex, most of the time people will not be able to follow up if we go through multiple hops, and that is what they do. So the fight is not between a law enforcement agency versus let's say a private player. It is all about how do we work together to solve for this. CyberSafe was one initiative, right, in which PhonePe as a company and including myself, we had participated. We came together as a group of close to 10 to 12 entities, including card processors, including PPI players or the wallet players. And the common problem that we foresaw effectively at that point in time, today a law enforcement agency, right? If let's say a fraud happens in Karnataka, the customer's account is in Maharashtra, the merchant is based out of Delhi, and the fraudster account is based out of Bihar, and the phone number issued is in West Bengal. Nobody has the wherewithal to travel or to traverse through all these paths and actually make a system or get to the root cause of it where the money is. Now, that is one of the problems. Today, if a law enforcement agency even wants to trace these funds, or a customer, of course, will not be able to trace these funds because of lack of information. When a law enforcement wants to do it, they have to spend a lot of time in trying to figure out, okay, first let me write to PhonePe. Once I get a response, I will write to the payment processor. Then I will write to the bank. Then I will write to the NPCI. Then I will write to the fraudster bank. All of these processes used to take, let's say, 5 to 10 days, right? Or even up to a month to 2 months in some cases. The idea of building a CyberSafe project was, this was a project under Ministry of Home Affairs with a division called FCOD. So we actually came together to see how can we solve for this. The idea was to give a law enforcement agency a report under 5 minutes about the fund movements through whichever entity is already integrated. And we have been one of the primary entities over there. If you look at the numbers, right, we have been able to say a reporting of close to 41 crores in the last 1 year plus that the system has been live, right? There have been more than 26,000 complaints which have been registered. And these, we are all talking about complaints being registered. Close to 30,000 fraud numbers have been put in a negative database, right? We have access to 2,000 odd bank accounts which are being called as blacklisted bank accounts. The problem does not stop there. We are working further to solve for this. I have been in talks with the National Cybercrime Portal, with NPCI, with TRAI as well, to understand how do we solve for these frauds. And we are working, though the steps do take time, because the cost of a false positive over here is much higher. at the end of the day, though we can build all the systems, but if tomorrow we blacklist a wrong number, where will that customer run to, right? The moment, let's say I say that this is a fraudster, and that number ends up blacklisting across all wallets, all bank accounts, all telecom providers, right? Where does that customer run to? Therefore, some of these steps will take some time, but there are projects that we are already working on to solve for these frauds. So that's all from my end. Over to the audience for any questions